Hey, podcast fans. Paul Lukas from Unified here. Are you bored with all the cookie-cutter t-shirts for your favorite college sports teams? Our friends at Home Field Apparel offer incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel featuring all sorts of vintage college sports designs, so you won't look like everyone else wearing the same Nike t-shirts. How do they do it? Well, Home Field combs through historic collections to find unique, retro-styled logos, mascots, and other graphics, and then uses those graphics to create fun designs for schools as large as the University of Alabama and as small as a Division III school like Hope College. And seriously, the designs really are fun. See for yourself at homefieldapparel.com and get 15% off your first order with the checkout code UNIFIED. That's homefieldapparel.com and use the checkout code UNIFIED for 15% off.
Hello, and welcome to a very, very special edition of the Unified Show. Paul, you ready? You ready for the big episode?
I am so ready for our first ever Ask Us Anything episode.
Ask Us Anything. And I got the first question in there. I asked if you were ready for the big episode. Sorry, I snuck that in there. Hope that's okay. But yeah, this is something that you had brought up like months ago. You wanted to do an Ask Us Anything episode right from the beginning. We didn't know when the best time to do it was, but I think this is a good time because going forward, we are, shortening our schedule a little bit more.
We are. We, first, as our regular listeners know, we took last week off. We had a scheduling conflict last week, and so we didn't really take it off, but we did deviate from our normal weekly schedule. And we're going to be deviating further, during the summer. We are going to step down our frequency from once a week to once a month for the summer. So this will be our only episode for May, and then we're going to do one episode per month for June, July, and August, and then hopefully return to a weekly or bi-weekly schedule in the fall. And there are a lot of reasons for this, and one of the reasons is that Chris is finding that life as a family man in the middle of a pandemic is a stressful and taxing role to play.
Yeah, it's hard both managing the virtual school and keeping everyone happy and planning and recording an episode every week. Who knew? But now we do know.
I mean, it's certainly true. And for people who already have podcasts, which seems like roughly half the human population right now, they already know. But for the half of you who don't already have podcasts, doing a podcast is actually a lot more work than it may seem like. It's not just sitting down and yakking every week, which I guess I kind of thought maybe it would just be like that. But it's actually a lot of planning. And of course, there's all sorts of editing and production. And we're super lucky to have help on that end. And you'll be hearing momentarily from the person who helps us with that. But still, even just like the social media promotion and setting up show notes every week and finding photos to run with the video and all that, it's a surprisingly large amount of work. And so we're taking a little step back, trying to regroup. And so we'll have a slower schedule in the summer, which really is when there's less uniform news, generally speaking, anyway, because during the summer, really, baseball is the only sport in operation, which is, I'm fine with that because it's my favorite sport, but it's not like the other times of the year when you have all the other sports going at once.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think is higher, the vaccination rate or the podcast hosting rate?
Right now, it's probably the podcast hosting rate, but hopefully the vaccination rate can sort of come from behind, down the back stretch and in a photo finish can get to the wire ahead of the podcasting rate.
What we need is the state of New Jersey to offer people a free beer if they don't host a podcast.
Exactly. Now, you have mentioned to me that you're going to soon be eligible for a vaccination yourself.
Yeah, finally. It's like a big day in our house because we've been waiting for this forever. And since we're in our 30s, we're not considered higher priority. We both work at home. So, I mean, we're kind of forgotten, and that's okay. We're fine with that. But starting Monday coming up, we can finally register, and we're looking forward to it. And hopefully in a few weeks, a few months, we can actually hang out with our friends and family again.
That's good.
Yeah,
I recommend it. I recommend both getting vaccinated and hanging out with your friends and family, which I've been lucky enough to be able to do in the last few weeks because I was vaccinated in March and April, the two shots.
Yeah.
And it's nice to, I mean, life isn't fully back to normal, but it's getting there.
It feels like it's going to be back to normal soonish, which is better than how it felt last year.
Right. But you still have your kids at home because your town is it, or is it the whole area of, I'm sorry?
The whole province is in
the whole province of Ontario is in lockdown. And so your kids who had gone back to school are back home and that turns out to be,
it's a lot
not necessarily a good fit with podcasting.
That's right. So this gives us the summer. We'll still talk to you once a month. And then it also allows Paul and I 3 weeks off in between to go outside and enjoy the warm weather, smell some flowers, do whatever it is we do in the summer. And we'll be even more rested and relaxed and refreshed with so much more to talk to you about on every episode.
Also, I don't mind saying, like, by covering breaking news on a weekly basis like we were doing, a lot of times I found myself on the podcast expressing the same thoughts, sometimes in literally the same words that I had used on my website on UniWatch. You know, that like we talk about the Cincinnati Bengals unveiling, I write a story about it, and then 2 days later we do a podcast about it. And I'm not really saying anything new on the podcast that I didn't already write 2 days earlier. And so I found myself wondering, where is the added value there for the listener? You know, what are they getting that they didn't already get from reading, you know, my article? And where is the value for me in terms of, you know, what am I expressing or learning or whatever? And so I think by spacing things out, it's going to basically force us to come up with new content formats. We're not going to be able to cover breaking news in the same kind of way because it's just going to be too long a gap. And I think that's a good thing. I think that like it'll force us to come up with different topics, different kinds of topics, different ways to approach topics instead of just sort of regurgitating or spitting out, or at least in my case, I don't want to speak for you, but for me, I found myself often expressing the same things I had already written. And I don't think that's good for the listener. I don't think it's good for me. So I kind of look forward to this new spaced out schedule as a sort of challenge in terms of how to approach the content.
Sure. Well, I don't know. That sounds like more work to me, but that's okay. We were trying to save on work. Now we've got more work. Maybe this is backfiring on us a little bit. Anyways, we'll try it out. I'm sure it'll be great. Maybe we can do an outdoor episode one day. Who knows?
Ooh,
right?
Hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. But before we spend the entire episode with our intro, we still have something like almost 30 questions we have to go through, Paul, from our listeners. We normally have a weekly listener submitted question, the question of the week, and we thought, or as you mentioned, I had wanted to do this for a while now, that we could do a whole episode of listener submitted questions, and so that's what we're going to do. We had quite a backlog because so many of you are sending in questions, which we love. Thank you very much. But at this rate, we wouldn't have gotten to your questions until sometime next year. It's not very feasible. It's not going to work. So let's just get rid of them all right now. Let's do it. And shall we turn it to our friendly producer, Chris Fraderigo?
Right. So we have a special guest on the episode this time, the questioner. Instead of Chris and I asking each other questions, which you know we could have done, instead we thought we'd have Chris Fraderigo, who is our awesome producer editor. We couldn't do the show without him. He graciously volunteers his time. And we thought he could be sort of the quiz master or whatever you want to call him, where he's asking the questions to us. And so Chris, or Frat, we call him Frat to distinguish him, even though his name is Chris. We call him Frat to distinguish him from Chris Creamer. Frat, take it away.
Thank you, guys. Long-time listener, first-time participant here. So I got the questions for us to go through. We'll alternate who starts with their answer, and we'll take it from there. So first question is going to come from Terry Mark, and his question is, for overall sports uniform and aesthetic greatness, what year or era would you want the sports world to look like all the time? Paul, you want to take us on?
I think the standard thing you're supposed to say here is whatever era you grew up in, because that's this kind of nostalgic answer. But I'm actually going to go a decade earlier than that and say I grew up in the 70s, but I was born and see photos from the 60s. And when I see sports in the 60s, to me, that is sort of the perfection, like the platonic ideal of sports. Baseball players were still wearing flannels, but they were lighter flannels and tighter fitting flannels than the flannels of like the 40s and 50s. They weren't like super baggy. The wool flannel was starting to be cut with a bit of nylon. And so it was lighter weight. They were wearing their stirrups just right, or at least my version of what's just right. Football, jerseys still had sleeves. Hockey uniforms at those, like it was just the original 6. And so there's like 6 classic uniforms. And even, if you look at photos from that era, the Kodachrome film, which is, how we see, the documents of that era through highlight films and photographs, the Kodachrome film had these saturated colors. And when to me that when I look at, footage and photos of the sports world in the 1960s, to me, that is just perfection. I wish sports could look like that still today.
I have to agree with Paul. I've always said that the pinnacle of design, not just in sports, but everywhere, is 1969, 1970. That's when I think that design hit its peak. Think of some of some of the logos that came out around that time, such as the Montreal Expos, the Atlanta Flames, the Atlanta Hawks, that Pac-Man logo, how something so simple became instantly classic just from such a simple design. And the Swinging Friar, the Padres, like just the new designs that came out of that era are just remarkable. And the uniforms back then, the team started experimenting with powder blue a little bit, but not crazy powder blue. We hadn't quite yet gone to the non-button-up uniforms. I can't remember the name. The pullover. I haven't quite gone to pullover jerseys yet, which I do not like, as Paul knows. So that to me is the best era in sports design. But do I want to watch every game like that all the time?
Yes.
Until the end of time. I don't know, Paul, because this is going to be a whole thing between you and I can tell now. And I'm already disagreeing with myself as I'm giving the answer. And so we only have 2 uniforms for every team. Oh, why am I saying this? Most of the road uniforms in baseball are gray. What am I saying? I'm saying after a while it might get a little boring seeing white versus gray every game. So I'm going to give a backup answer. If I had to pick one look to see every day the rest of my life, even though I don't necessarily like it, the 1990s. Because it's just so bold and bright and colorful, and the graphics are in your face, and it's just a little more visually interesting, not necessarily better. Mm-hmm. How's that?
Good answer.
Okay.
All right. And so from Rob Naylor asks, I know Paul has referred to the Jaguars' original Mark Brunell era uniforms as modern classics that the team should have stuck with. High praise for an expansion franchise. What other contemporary expansion teams do you think have had the best uniforms in each of the major sports? Let's use the 1988 as the dividing line, since that's when the Heat and Hornets came into existence. And then all the other major pro leagues had lots of new expansion teams in the 90s. Chris?
Well, I'll start with the jersey behind me, people watching on TV or on YouTube. The Florida Panthers in the early 90s. I love that color scheme. I love the red and the blue and the yellow. Anytime a team goes red, blue, yellow together, I feel it's underused in sports. Who else? Sticking with hockey, the Minnesota Wild, I think their logo is a modern classic with a bunch of elements put together to form a new image. It's sort of like the Hartford Whalers in a way, much more complicated than the Whalers, but same idea. The Florida Marlins with introducing teal to baseball. I think their expansion look in 93 was a little bit too much teal, but fast forward to the 2000s when they toned the teal down a bit. they switched that road uniform script to that scripted Florida across the front instead of the arched Florida. I thought that was a really smart look. And in basketball, the Orlando Magic, those uniforms they wore in the first Shaquille O'Neal days, I thought that was a pretty good look with the black and the blue and the pinstripes, the stars everywhere. I don't know if any of those top the Jaguars, but they're in the same ballpark, if you will. Paul?
So I would say, obviously, the Jags for the NFL, it's true. I think that that Mark Brunell era uniform, if only they had left it alone, and they've still never quite gotten back to matching that design. They lost their way and went, with a two-tone helmet and all that, and they've slowly sort of gotten back to some semblance of aesthetic respectability, but they've never matched that original design. I'm totally with you on the Minnesota Wild. I love that crest, the main logo. I love the color scheme. Green is my favorite color, so I love their use of green. I don't think the Wild have ever really had a bad uniform. And so to me, they knocked that out of the box pretty much from the start and have always had a really good looking visual program. In the NBA, I'd say one of the teams mentioned in the questioner's question, which is the Heat. The Miami Heat's basic chest lettering, with the flame coming off the T, it's very simple, and it has proven to be really durable and a really good, it speaks well, it like makes the good impression. And I feel like it doesn't look dated. It feels as contemporary and, gets the point across as well today as it did when it came out. And for baseball, I'm a little surprised to hear myself saying this, but the Arizona Diamondbacks, their original set, the purple and teal set, which they still occasionally wear as throwbacks, has aged, to my mind, surprisingly well. It looks like better than I would have expected, at this late date. And also they still use, although in a different colorway, they still use that basic A with the forked tongue serving as the crossbar in the A. That logo has also aged really well, in whatever color configuration you want to use it. Like that mark has held up really, really well. So that's something they got right, right out of the box.
Ian Lee asks, if you could pick any two teams from the same league but different eras to face each other based on their uniforms, what would it be?
I would say I would take, say, the mid 60s, late 60s Green Bay Packers. Preferably photographed in Kodachrome, like I was saying before, with that deep, rich hunter green and the mustard yellow pants, on a nice, brisk October afternoon at Lambeau, like a chewed up grass turf. And I would put them up. Now, technically, they're not the same league, but this is a matchup that never could have happened back in the day. I would put them up against the Lance Allworth era Chargers. And because they were in the AFL and could not play each other at that time. And so that to me would be like a really great, uniform matchup. Two of the greatest looking, football teams really ever in my mind. Two of the really great uniform designs.
That's a good answer, Paul. I think I'm a little more boring because my ideal uniform matchup happens all the time. And I'm a traditionalist, so I love the Detroit Red Wings when they visit the Montreal Canadiens. And that red and white Red Wings uniform with the Canadiens jersey with the blue stripe across the front. My two favorite uniforms facing off each other almost all the time in a normal year. Not this year, unfortunately.
Right.
But because I like going off the board and being a little crazy sometimes, how about the 1970s Pillbox Pirates in their gold and black uniform against Boston Red Sox City Connect uniforms from 2020. Let's go nuts. How about the Phillies and their Saturday night specials against the Cleveland Blood Clot uniforms from the 70s?
Mono red versus mono maroon?
Yes, let's go. Let's tear this up. Let's go in a different direction altogether. Come on. You can see it, right?
Yep.
Well, how about a little less boring but still fun? How about the New York Giants at the New York Mets? We get the same cap logo against each
Yeah,
other.
yeah, exactly. Interlocking NY versus interlocking NY. I like that.
I feel like I abused Ian's premise of his question.
All right. So from David Lawrence, what is the current or past uniform that most people don't like, but you do, and vice versa? Name a uniform that other people like, but you don't.
One that I find that I like a lot that a lot of people don't is the Tampa Bay Devil Rays circa 2001, 2002, when they went to black and green. And they had that cap logo with the TB and the Ray going across, and that road uniform with the arch Tampa Bay in green. Green and black is not a color scheme that you see a lot in baseball. But green, blue, and black. I forgot there's a little bit of blue they had in there. And I thought that was a really smart look that the Devil Rays had. And they act as if it never existed, right? They go back to the 98 design a lot. They wear this, fairly boring design. Unfortunately, they've seen the most success in their most boring design. That's just the way things happen to work. So that's one that I really love that others don't seem to. The Milwaukee Brewers, when they replaced the ball and glove logo originally with the blue and the green combination in the mid-90s, I really do like that. Unfortunately, it's between that and a classic logo. They're just never going to win, but that's another big one. And my Maple Leafs, their 1970s look with the contrasting stripes down the sleeves. It's not very traditional for such a traditional team, but it's what they wore when I started watching them, so I have a lot of special feelings when it comes to that one. The vice versa, the ones that I don't like that people tend to like are ones that they weren't popular when they came out, but now because they're retro and throwback and cool, everyone seems to like them now, such as the Mighty Ducks, their original uniforms, that logo. I thought it was so silly when that came out. It's, very Disneyfied. It's kind of minor league-ish, but, people love it now because it's old and retro. And same goes for the Raptors with their purple uniforms and the big giant raptor on the front. Sure, it's fun to see them wear it, but I didn't like it. I couldn't stand that uniform and logo. It's not major league. At least it's not major league now. Maybe back in the 90s it was the thing to do. But yeah, those are my two. Paul?
We are, as is so often the case, we're in lockstep here. I was also going to list that green Devil Rays uniform as one that I don't think got much love at the time and certainly doesn't get any now, but I always thought it was great. And they had a vest at that time as well. And I always like to see a couple of teams around baseball wearing vests. So that's one that I like that nobody else seemed to like, except you, Chris, it turns out. And one that everybody else seems to love that I never liked was the first Charlotte Hornets uniform, the one designed by Alexander Julian, the menswear designer. Mm-hmm. And it really ushered in the teal and purple revolution. And that's not the only reason I dislike it. I've never really liked the fact that the striping on it is asymmetrical, mm-hmm. like for both of the jerseys. But I think the teal one is the one I think that people associate most with that. That's the one people seem to like more. So you've got a teal jersey with like a green stripe going down one side, a green pinstripe, and a purple stripe going down the other side. And to me, that just feels unbalanced because usually uniforms have like a symmetry of ornamentation. Except for something like a sleeve patch where you might have that just on one sleeve. But like for striping and piping and things like that, there's usually a symmetry to it. And to have just one color on one side and the other color on the other, it's always bugged me. Yeah. And I never really understood why that design is held in such high regard. And it's always been sort of on the outs with me. And so that's one where everyone else seems to love it, but I don't love it.
And that striping didn't add anything to it, right? Like if those colors switched to just the same color all the way around or alternating in a pattern, it would have looked maybe even better, just as good.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, just green on one and purple on the other. It doesn't add to the design. Like if it wasn't there, you wouldn't miss it, right?
I think that was very Alexander Julian. Like his clothing line at the time was actually called Colors. Like that was the name of his brand, Colors by Alexander Julian. And he had a lot of striping patterns like that on his suits and things. But for a uniform, again, like it's, it really struck me at the time, and 30 some years later, it still hits me. It's like, where's the symmetry, man? It just doesn't work for me.
All right, from Kyle Berry, what are your thoughts on any of the major 4 leagues adopting era throwback weeks throughout the season? The idea here would be a 60s week, 70s week, and so on, where all the teams in the league would wear their respective throwbacks from that era at the same time. Umpires or refs could get into the action, and ballparks could be retrofied too.
I love that idea, and I'm frankly a little surprised no league has done it yet. It seems like a natural. You do have some issues, like some teams didn't exist yet in the 60s. So, how do they do a 60s throwback? But usually there's some minor league team from that city or something like that that they could use. And if you're not going to do it for a whole week, then why has no league done Throwback Thursday? Like a league-wide throwback. It just seems like a natural. And I'm really surprised. In fact, the NFL, of course, has Thursday night games, and that in particular seems like a gimme. Like to have the NFL do Throwback Thursdays for its Thursday night program, certainly better than Color Rush.
Yeah.
I love that idea. And, you do have some issues again with some teams that didn't exist in whatever era you might be throwing back to. But they could do faux backs, because faux backs are always fun. Everybody loves those. And, seems like a natural. And I especially love that the questioner said that refs could get into the action too, because, except for the NFL, I don't think any of the other leagues have really done the throwback thing for its officials. Like baseball umpires have never done it. The NFL did do it, with like the AFL throwbacks. They had the umps wear the old, orange striped AFL, referees jerseys, which were great. I think for an all-star game, the NHL had the hockey officials in like the old sweaters that they used to wear, like gray or oatmeal sweaters. That was good, but it was only for an all-star game, not for like a regular throwback game. And I don't think the NBA has ever had its officials wear throwback uniforms. So yeah, it would be nice to see the throwback games in general, whether on a weekly league-wide basis or just as a one-off. It would be nice to see the officials getting into the act.
Yeah, I think this is a 3-0 fastball right down the middle from Kyle Berry, because who's going to say no to this idea? Absolutely. And this is something that should have happened when the NFL and NHL celebrated their 100th, when baseball did their 150th. Next year, when the NBA does their 75th, this is a no-brainer to me, right? Imagine how exciting this would be. And again, I'll frame this in terms that Nike, Adidas, and the leagues can understand. Imagine the money you could make from selling these jerseys from, imagine an entire week where every team is wearing their 1970s uniform, right? You turn on a game, there's the retro Jays against the retro Rangers, whatever, that sounds amazing to me. I would watch every game. I would just keep flipping back and forth. Oh, just incredible. But instead, we get Players Weekend, we get earned edition uniforms. It's clear that they can design these things on a league-wide basis and roll them out and get them to market and make it work. They keep going in the wrong direction
It seems to me that all fans like throwbacks, like including the younger, hipper, the fans that they're trying to reach with things like Earned Edition or City Connect or whatever, the supposed newer, younger, more short attention span fan. Like they like those kinds of things. They like old, like everybody likes the retro thing. Like it appeals to every generation, not just the generation that grew up with it or something like that. And so it's perplexing to me that they haven't done that.
And, and those milestone anniversary seasons I quoted, like how did they miss those? It's not like those milestone anniversaries came up out of nowhere, right? Like they
it didn't sneak up on them.
They had literally, the NHL had 100 years to plan for their 100th anniversary season, and they did nothing. Oh man. Come on, guys.
From Jason Dockery. Let's say a team has a particular uniform element that you hate, but has now become a long-standing part of their visual identity. It could be a stripe, a logo, a color, whatever. For example, Paul, you hate purple, but would you really want the Vikings or Rockies to change to green just because you hate purple and love green? or should they stick with what they have, even though you dislike it?
You mean to tell me Paul hates purple? I've never heard that. That's
little known fact.
Is it my turn to go first? He addressed you in the question.
He addressed me, so let me take it. And I'll just say that as much as I hate purple, I never understand it when teams change colors. Like the Diamondbacks, in fact, who we were mentioning earlier, and one of their colors was purple. And one day, they were telling their fans, you got to root for the purple and teal. And then the next day was actually, you got to root for the black and Sedona red, or whatever it is they're calling it. I've never understood that. It strikes me both as bad branding, bad fan relations, bad everything. Like once your colors are the colors are what they are, man. And at least in this era, like maybe back in the 20s or 30s, teams, they would change colors just based on what color fabric was available at a discount from the supplier. But nowadays, your colors are your colors. And so I would never want the Vikings or the Rockies or any of those teams to change their color. I mean, the Vikings are the purple people eaters. That's what they are. It's part of their DNA now. And, I might just say, well, they're stuck with it now. But it depends on what the element is. Team colors, I don't think should be changed. Things like a logo, you can always change a logo. It depends on how much of how firmly imprinted on the firmament of the team it is, right? If for some reason I didn't like the Detroit Red Wings logo, which is a very much a hypothetical because I like it just fine, but you couldn't tell the Detroit Red Wings, well, change that logo. Like that's not something you can change. Like that's kind of etched in stone at this point. So I would say it kind of varies by team. If I might say the Bengals helmet is a good example of this because I've never liked the Bengals striped helmet. And I do kind of wish they would change it, but I understand that they're not going to. Like that is now their visual signature, for better or worse. And I think, I understand that a lot of fans think it's for better. I'm not one of those people, but I know there are a lot of such people. And so, yeah, at some point, and I don't know what the sort of threshold is or the statute of limitations or whatever, at some point with certain uniform and design elements, you reach a point where there's no going back, sort of a point of no return where like, that's just who we are. That's what we are. We're not going to change it. I'm okay with that. Like, even if it's an element that I don't like.
Does it have to transcend generations, I guess? Like, this is the same helmet my dad rooted for, and now this is the same helmet my son's rooting for. Mm-hmm. At that point, perhaps it's etched in stone, sometimes quite literally, as you say. And I agree with you. There's some elements I don't like, but I understand that they should stick around. And a good example for me is the Dallas Cowboys. I hate mismatched colors. Why? Why are they mismatched? But it would raise hell if the Cowboys decided to change the color of their pants from silver green to match the color of their shells. Because that's just too much a part of their identity right now. And it gives me something to tell people if we find ourselves watching a Cowboys game on the couch beside each other.
Yeah, it's a conversation point. And that's one of those fun sort of quirks, like the Tigers, how they used to have the mismatched cap and jersey logos. Those are sort of fun where you can point back to like, oh, back in the day, someone got the logos mixed up and it somehow got institutionalized and repeated over and over. And same with the Cowboys, like someone got the colors mismatched and they just stuck with it. And there's this sort of endearing charm to something like that kind of, to think that there was a time when that kind of mistake could be made, because it would never be made today. And so it's nice to kind of have that as a record of that era when you could make that kind of mistake. And I always thought it was a shame that the Tigers, that they unified, as it were, the two logos. Yeah, for other things like I also like the Cowboys color inconsistency kind of bugs me, but I hope they never change it.
Yeah, sometimes things can look too perfect, too matched. Mm-hmm. Right? Sometimes it's good to have a little mismatch in there.
Yeah.
So we got plenty more questions, but before we do, Chris, do you have some words for our fans?
I sure do, Frat. Now, you probably have plenty of caps featuring the logos of your favorite teams, but Aced Out is the officially licensed cap that lets you show your love for a specific player. They have caps you won't find anywhere else, saluting today's hottest stars like Mike Trout, Fernando Tatis Jr., and Jacob deGrom. and their designs are available in a variety of styles from snapbacks all the way to dad caps, my favorite. Aced Out also has a collection of super soft tri-blend t-shirts officially licensed by the Baseball Hall of Fame, saluting immortal players like Frank Thomas, Tom Seaver, George Brett, Johnny Bench, and Cal Ripken Jr. These caps and shirts are not available in stores or on any other website. You have to go to acedout.com. And you can save 20% off right now by using the code UNIFIED at checkout. acedout.com, checkout code UNIFIED for 20% off your first order.
All right. Our first question from our Twitter fans, John Sebastian Valancourt at JS Valancourt asks, how many years is it okay for a jersey to come back as a throwback?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. I can recall one time the Tampa Bay Lightning, even though they got rid of their logo one season, they came right back with it the next year as a patch on their alternate jersey. And I think that was more a case of not getting the new third jersey approved in time. So that was a little bit of a special circumstance. I would say maybe 10 years, just long enough for a fan to miss the uniform and long enough for a new fan to have never seen them live. I feel like 10 years is a good, nice round number for a throwback. Now let's not get crazy and start throwing back to 2011 now, like all the time. Like that's a special circumstance, I think. But yeah, let's at least get to double digits before we start fondly remembering.
I would agree. I think at least 10 years. I might go even a little bit further, but 10 years, it starts sounding like at least a good, reasonable starting point as a benchmark. There really is no official or even unofficial unwritten rule for that kind of thing. So we are creating it now.
That's right.
At least 10 years before you can do a throwback.
I think that's part of our responsibilities as a uniform podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We come up with the unofficial unwritten uniform rules.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Sticking with throwbacks, Jay Mazzone asks, how will the Washington football team and Cleveland baseball team handle throwback games? After 10 years, as just discussed, or 15 years, do you think they'll wear Redskin and Indian throwbacks? Will they adopt the Tampa Bay Rays approach and create retro throwbacks, or will they just not do anything throwback related?
I think for Cleveland, I think it's a safe bet that, number one, Chief Wahoo will not be appearing on a uniform ever again, the Chief Wahoo logo. And I think it is unlikely that the word Indians will be appearing on a jersey again after this season. As far as the Washington football team, certainly their old name is not going to appear on a jersey the way it used to be in small lettering across the chest. I don't think that's ever going to happen again. Would they ever wear their old helmet? I doubt it. Especially since by the time they would be ready to do a throwback, the NFL presumably won't have the one shell rule anymore, and they could just do a throwback from some other era where there was that one time where they did the sort of faux leatherhead treatment on the helmet shell. I doubt that either of those teams will use the Native American imagery ever again. The only thing that I think could change that would be if those teams in their new incarnations choose as a sort of like a way to make amends for their past identities. If they forge some sort of goodwill relationship with local tribes or something like that, and have native groups have some input or something like that, something like we've seen in the minor leagues with the Spokane Indians, where they did a uniform in their native language in Salish. And if these teams had some kind of relationship, not just some sort of virtue signaling, but a real relationship, with Native American groups, maybe, as a result of that, throwbacks could come back, but otherwise I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I agree with Paul. Barring some sort of agreement with a local tribe, we probably won't see them bring back those logos or names ever again. I could see sort of a faux-back style uniform, like, say, Cleveland wants to throw back to we talked about it earlier, the all-red uniforms. Maybe they do it. Yeah, the blood clot uniforms. Maybe they do it with Cleveland across the front, just to see on the. They find a way to honor that era without using the offending words and logos. And in the case of Washington, what do you think? Like you said, Native American imagery. What do you think about going back to the R with a feather for a throwback? Is that
feather is part of Native American? Yeah. I mean, the feather for many Native Americans is more sacred than anything else. So yeah, I don't see that happening.
Right. So, but they wore stuff before that, right? Like they used to have did they have a plane helmet at one point?
Yeah. Oh, they had a spear helmet. They had,
I don't think the spear would work.
No, that would not work.
So yeah, to answer that question, I could see them. I don't think they'll never wear throwbacks ever again. They'll approach it a little differently.
Mm-hmm. And a faux-back is certainly a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And sticking with the faux-back theme, Mike at Official Norway asks, do you think we'll see any teams do fake throwbacks like the Tampa Bay's Rays faux-back uniforms?
This is exciting to get a message from the Official Norway account. That's pretty big, I think. I'm just surprised that they'd be interested in fake throwback uniforms. But hey, whatever. We don't disappoint our audience depending where they're from. But yeah, absolutely we're going to see that again. The Texas Rangers did this like years ago, right? They wore like a faux back 1950s uniform, 1930s uniform back when throwback uniforms first started, I think like 92, 93. And that, talk about being ahead of the game on that, the Texas Rangers. How about, right, instead of a reverse retro NHL, we do a faux back series. Like they're going to run out of ideas in reverse retro, assuming they keep going with this idea. There's one idea, right? Like they could do a faux back series, and as we discussed earlier in the show, the throwback decade week, right? Like there's another excuse for a faux back uniform. So to answer this question, yeah, it's going to happen. Some other team's going to do it. It's just too good of an idea for these teams to ignore. And let's be honest, they're going to run out of ideas someday. They're going to need something else to do. There will be a faux back week somewhere in pro sports.
I can see it for the teams the newer teams like the Rays that don't have a deep history. I can't see a team that has, an actual uniform history, to go back to where they can do legitimate throwbacks. I can't see that, like a team like that doing it. So I think it depends on the franchise, and I think it would be difficult to do it on a league-wide basis to tell a team that actually existed in 1947 that you should create a uniform that looks like it's from 1947 or something like that. So yeah, I think there's probably a reason why this hasn't become a widespread thing. It was a fun idea for the Rays, especially because they were knocking off all these 70s cliches with their, which 70s was very dated period for design in general and for uniform design in particular. And so that was a really like a good foil for the Rays for doing that. But I'm not sure it works for every team or for every era.
But one example, and we just touched upon this before, is teams that have throwback uniforms they can't wear, right? That might
right. For something, yes. So for something like the Indians or the Washington football team or something like that. Yeah.
I guess you could like the reverse retro program in a way was a faux back series for some of these, just like the Canadians wearing a blue uniform, which they never wore before, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
All right. From Chris at Alphabee. Because of so many alternate uniforms now, do you think there's a chance that in 20 to 30 years, there won't be anything from the past 20, 30 years that will be iconic enough to wear as a throwback?
That's a really funny question. I think in a lot of ways, all the alternates lend themselves better to throwbacks because in a lot of cases, ideas that seem preposterous in the whatever era they were introduced, the sort of at their contemporary moment, are the things, we get outraged about or we roll our eyes at or whatever. And then in 15 or 20 years, we can sort of laugh at them and say, oh God, remember that. And for one night, it's really fun, or even for one season. And so especially like in the NBA where there are so many alternates that last only one or two seasons, I can see throwbacks coming back where they'll say, hey, remember this? And people are going to say, actually, no, I don't remember that. Was that actually a uniform? And because it was only like the earned uniform that was worn for 7 games in one season or whatever it was. And then everyone forgot about it. And then like in 15 years, you can bring it back or something like that. And the more, in some ways, the more preposterous or inconsequential an alternate design is at a given moment, I think in some ways that makes it better suited to be a throwback down the road. Classic designs work as throwbacks too, of course, but really good classic designs hopefully never have to be throwbacks because you just keep them. But in some ways, I think, while the questioner said like, none of these will be iconic enough to throw back to, that part is true, but I don't think you have to have a design be iconic for it to serve well as a throwback.
Mm-hmm. I think, despite the increase in uniforms per team, one design is always going to stand out as the look for that team, whether it was worn a lot or not a lot. And one example would be my Toronto Raptors, who have now embraced an earned edition as their look for an entire season, even though they only wore it, for 4 or 5 games during the entire playoffs. Because they wore it during the clincher, that is now the look for that entire season.
Now you mean the chevron design, which
yes, that's right,
which debuted as an earned design.
That's right. So, and now it's their full-time uniform. So, even though it was an earned design, they hardly wore it. It's what we associate with that era, rightly or wrongly. And to go back to what Paul was saying, the more unusual a design is, the more likely it's going to be brought back as a throwback in some future when some generation who doesn't exist yet discovers it on whatever the future Uniwatch blog is in 2050. Think of the New Jersey Nets and their tie-dye uniform, right? Like that was a 1 year only. No one would call it an iconic look, but because it's weird, it's unusual, it stands out apart from the rest. 30 years later, we're thrown back to it.
Right.
So to me, that's a good example of, not an iconic look in any way, but it's still fun to throw back to now and then.
From David Lawrence, is there a team that has never gotten it right in your eyes from a uniform standpoint? And conversely, is there a team that has never had a misstep?
The Vancouver Canucks have never gotten it right. No matter how hard they try, no matter how hard they completely tear everything down and start over again, switching from blue and green to black and yellow to blue and red, now back to blue and green. None of these work. None of these are iconic looks for the team. Though what they wear now is the closest they've come to nailing that. It's still not great. And the problem is they picked a name like Canucks that it's hard to brand that, right? Like it's like an abstract, really. The Johnny Canuck alternate logo where they have like the lumberjack with the beard. I feel that's the closest they have to really nailing the Canuck idea. But no, they've never done it. The opposite of that, teams that have never had a misstep, the Raiders, despite the fact that they've moved a million times, they've never, screwed up their uniforms. They've never changed it. So they've never screwed it up. A more modern example, I would say the Carolina Panthers. Every uniform they've ever come out with, I've loved. Alternates, whatever, color rush uniforms, they all look great. So a couple of examples there. Paul?
Wow, I am so the opposite of you on that last comment because I feel like the Carolina Panthers have never gotten it right. I've never liked that pointy striping down the side of the pants. I've never liked the helmet striping that I guess is supposed to look like whiskers or something, except whiskers aren't on the top of a cat's head. So, and the stripes diverge, they sort of like, they go, what's the opposite of tape? I guess they flare out. I've never really liked they've never really changed it either. I wish they would. I've never liked that uniform. So that's an example for me of a team that's never gotten it right. I am with you on the Canucks. For me, teams that, have never had a misstep other than teams that never made a change like the Raiders. we mentioned one earlier in this episode, which is the Minnesota Wild. I feel have basically, like, they've tinkered with their look a little bit, but the tinkering has always been good. Like, they have always looked good. And I would also say that after 60 years, I don't think the San Diego Chargers, or now Los Angeles Chargers, have ever worn a bad uniform. There are different versions that have been somewhat better or somewhat worse, but even their worst uniform is pretty good. And I would say that's a team that has never had a serious mistake.
Absolutely. And that goes back to an earlier question we had, where is there a uniform you like that other people don't? That navy blue Chargers uniform with the yellow, like the Doug Flutie era, I love that uniform. I love that color combination. And everyone wanted to go back to powder blue. But like you say, like every single version of that uniform, it seems to be the same striping on every uniform.
I mean, they basically have a helmet with lightning bolts and shoulders with lightning bolts and pants with lightning bolts, but they've varied up the colors and the sort of the tailoring and the configuration and even the number of points and jaggy bits on the lightning bolts over the years. But the helmet has changed colors at times. I don't think they've ever gotten it wrong. I think there's just different gradations of how right it is.
Alex Myers asks, do you agree the Houston Texans are the most blah or generic look in sports? If you could change any part of their brand identity, what would it be?
I do generally agree that the Texans have an incredibly bland look. When I see them, it almost feels more like a college team than a pro team. And I think a big reason for that, because I've asked myself, why do I think, because I actually like their helmet logo. Like, I think it's pretty cool. But part of it certainly is, God, there's so many red and blue teams, right? And so, or in their case, sort of blue with red trim. And so that's part of it, is the color scheme. And then also those shoulder stripes. They have that kind of, it's not like the double stripes like the Colts have, or classic UCLA stripes, with, white color white. It's just like one band of color, and then it tapers a little as it comes forward. And there's something about that to me sort of screams stock jersey from the middle of the catalog, not the highest price, not the super cheap one, but the sort of mid-level thing that a Division II college gets or something like that. It's a stock template look, and it just doesn't, something about it has never felt very NFL to me.
I'll be honest, I've never thought about the Houston Texans uniform and logo, and that might just prove the questioner's point that it is blah and generic. Are they more generic than, say, the Oklahoma City Thunder? I don't know. I think the Thunder might give them a run for their money in terms of most generic logo. I don't hate the Texans logo. I don't hate their uniforms. They're just there. They're like mashed potatoes. They're like plain oatmeal, right? It's there.
It's like the Padres before they went back to brown.
Yes, that's a good way.
When there was, it's not like they were ugly, but they were just characterless.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about the Texans. Even though I do like the helmet logo, it doesn't pop on the Navy shell. When they launched the franchise, for those of us who follow this kind of thing, it's sort of a famous photo where they at the introductory press conference, when they were awarded the franchise, they had a white shell with that same, the same, longhorn steer look that looks like the Texans flag. And I think that would have been so much better. To go with that. But whatever it is, it's not that they're ugly or unattractive. It's just, there's no there there.
There's no there there. It just is. And I don't even have a solution for how to make them look better. So, sorry, Texans. You're going to just have to exist in some sort of design purgatory.
So we got plenty more questions coming your way, but first, Paul, do you have some more words for our fans?
I do. I want to tell everyone that this episode of Unified is brought to you by, literally brought to you by, Astrolux Innovations. Astrolux is our podcast host, and they also designed our website, unified.show, where we have our show notes, links, photos, and so on. When Chris and I wanted to do a podcast together, we had no idea how to get started. Astrolux Innovations got us set up, and has been helping us each step of the way. So if you're looking for fast, reliable, and affordable podcast hosting that comes with a sharp-looking, forward-facing website, get in touch with Astrolux Innovations at SportsLogos.Net. That's Astrolux with an E at the end, ASTROLUXE.io. They'll make the whole process easy and understandable so your podcast will stand out from the crowd. And make sure to let them know that you heard about them on Unified.
Aaron at AJ Castellan asks, do you want to see NHL coaching staffs lose the suit and tie like NBA coaches have done this season? And should they just wear team branded apparel instead?
Absolutely not, right? That's ridiculous. I love the suit and tie look, right? And if it was up to me, wear the fedoras like in the old days too. Let's go all the way back. Let's have every coach out there look like Punch Imlach or Tom Landry. Come on. That's fun. And while we're at it, let's Connie Mack it up, right? Let's go. Let's bring baseball managers back. Yeah, I don't know. To me, it looks a little unprofessional to have coaches out there in their athletic jackets, their sweatsuits, their jogging suits, whatever. I don't like the basketball coach look this year. I mean, I don't hate it, but something about a suit and a tie just makes me feel like I'm watching something very important that needs to be respected. That's just my quick and dirty take on that. Paul, come on.
I hadn't really thought much about hockey coaches. It would be really strange to see them not in a suit and tie. Generally, I kind of like the idea of the boss dressing formally. But I have to tell you, I recently saw some footage from 1967, some NHL footage, and all these people on the Canadiens bench, not the coach, but like trainers, assistants, they were wearing these cardigans, these Canadiens cardigans, sort of like the old baseball cardigans that eventually were replaced by dugout jackets. And man, they looked great. So that would be pretty cool. I wouldn't mind seeing the coach in like a sweater, like a true sweater. Not, we call hockey jersey sweaters, but like a true sweater. But of course they would probably market, like a casual Friday polo shirt or something like that, because that's what they have the coach dress up in, because that's what they can sell. But I think that would be kind of cool.
Isn't that like didn't like Ditka wear a sweater in the 80s? I'm trying to think.
He wore like a sweater vest,
right?
Yeah, which that helped transition coaches away from suit and tie, and really helped launch the coaches as mannequins to sell NFL sportswear. Yeah,
I think maybe you're swaying me a little bit. You're swaying me. Okay, maybe just dress nicely. I don't want to see like the tracksuit. That's all I don't want.
The tracksuit, yeah. I'm with you.
That's not a good look.
Yeah.
All right. Carrie Klismet asks, aside from the 5 major North American team sports, what other sports are you most interested in? And do any uniforms from those other sports stand out to you as memorable or noteworthy?
At this point, I am not really interested, or I don't follow any of the other sports other than the major team sports. At one time in my life, I was very into boxing, which is not a team sport, of course, but it's an individual sport. And I still sometimes if there's a big fight, I won't watch it, but I'll look at the photos or highlights afterwards, and I do note the trunks. I take note of trunk design and glove design. And when Muhammad Ali died, I actually wrote several articles about his trunks through the years. So that was a sport where I cared about the aesthetics and the design a fair amount. And at one time, when I was younger, I cared a reasonable amount about tennis. The Grand Slam tour. I would watch Wimbledon and the US Open and all of that. And I cared about the uniforms and the apparel in that a bit. But I haven't followed either of those sports or really any other sport, in quite a while.
Like you, Paul, I was a big boxing fan back 20, 30 years ago. Back in the days of Tyson and Holyfield and Foreman, nothing greater to me back then than renting off pay-per-view and seeing the fight and getting my poor dad to spend $70 to watch Tyson knock out a guy in 48 seconds. Some good memories of rants from my dad after that. But I wish I had time to watch. Like, I don't even have time to watch the sports I'm a hardcore fan of these days, unfortunately. I love baseball, hockey, and basketball. I never really watch soccer, and I rarely watch football. But if I do have time on a morning, and I find it on television, I will stop and watch a cricket. I'll watch rugby. I'll watch lacrosse.
Oh, I had no idea. I didn't know you were into those sports.
No, well, it goes like one time there was like some world cricket tournament going on, and my dad and I made it a focus to, okay, we're going to watch this. We're going to learn all the rules. We're going to figure out how this game is played. And once I did, I thought, look, this is a pretty interesting, fun game. Sixes and overs and sticky wickets. And
I'll tell you a little something, a little story. Yeah. When I was at ESPN, at one point they were broadcasting the Cricket World Cup or the world, whatever the world, I don't even remember and my editor told me, you got to write a piece about cricket uniforms. And I said, I don't know anything about cricket. And he said, yeah, well, you better learn. And so I put out a call on my blog, said, like, does anyone know, like, can someone teach me about cricket uniforms? And this guy from New Jersey actually came over to Brooklyn, at like 5 a.m, which is where some tournament was live streaming on, in India or Pakistan or something like that. And he came over with a box of donuts at like 5 a.m, and we sat there watching cricket, and he was schooling me, saying, like, you see this guy and see how this works and see this uniform and all of that. And 15 years at ESPN, it's the only time they told me I had to write about something. They gave me incredible creative freedom, editorial freedom during my time there, but they said, you got to write about cricket because we're televising it. And so that was my one time basically sort of cramming for the test to learn how to write about cricket. And that was, I don't know how many years ago that was, but I have retained approximately 0 of it. Like, I don't remember anything except the donuts. That was about it.
But did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy it?
I did. Yeah, learning about it, about this new sport that I knew nothing about. Yeah, it was interesting. And I did write a piece about it. And, I think I ended up enlisting the guy who came over. Like, I quoted him a lot in the article, or like we formatted it as like a conversation back and forth about the uniforms. And so that was interesting. It was a good learning experience, except apparently my learning retention was not good.
It's like baseball, really. It's like long form baseball.
Yeah, except foul balls count, or they're in play, or something like that.
Fun. Imagine if like home plate was right like behind second base.
All right. Mike Wilson asks, how do you feel about teams from the same college or university adopting design elements from another sport? For example, many college hockey teams wear helmets that match the football team's helmets. Or now many UNC teams wear Argyle, even though it was created for the basketball team. Is it good to have a school-wide unified look, or should each team have its own identity?
I would say a unified look. That would be the way to go, right? Where possible. If like, I would be okay if a team wanted some sort of unique alternate that's sport specific, for their individual sport. But like, if a team wears pinstripes, right, try to incorporate that across the board. Like, imagine the New York Yankees started, okay, we're going to do a basketball team, right? That team's got to wear pinstripes if they're going to be called the Yankees and represent the Yankees brand. I would think you'd want some sort of unifying look across the entire school where you could do it just to sort of help convey that message that, yeah, we're all part of the same team. Maybe we're not the national championship legendary football team. Maybe we're just like the school curling team. There is no NCAA curling, but there should be. But we still wear the same iconic elements as that super famous football team.
I'm not so sure I agree. I think this tends to, it's always going to tip the balance of power to the bigger sports, the more popular sports, because, well, first of all, this idea of pinstripes. So you're going to dress the football team in pinstripes? Like,
yes, let's do it.
I'm not so sure about that.
Why not?
But also, it's always like the football team. It's mainly the football team that drives a lot of this. Like, I know at the University of Michigan, I'm not sure if this is still the case, but I know at one time, the winged helmet design that the football team wears, and which is iconic, even though, they didn't even come from Michigan. They got it from Princeton originally. at one time, the baseball team was wearing those same winged stripes, and the softball team and the water polo team on their little like shower cap kind of things, and every team. And there's something, I don't know, if I were on the water polo team, would I want like yet another reminder that basically that football runs everything at the University of Michigan? I'm not sure I would want that. And like, why can't you have your own, like if there's a unifying, you've got unified team, like school colors, that's good. You want unifying school colors and a logo like an M for Michigan or whatever it might be. But I don't know if I want team specific things bleeding into other sports. Like to me, that just sort of reinforces the hierarchy of like certain sports being more popular, or I don't know. Not like, why can't the water polo team have its own distinctive, iconic look?
Because there is no distinct water polo look.
Well, maybe there is, and you and I just don't know about it. It just seems
a paradox.
It just seems like, especially with headwear, which I feel is, well, no, the questioner also asked about the Argyle, right? The yes. Argyle, which also came from Alexander Julian, just like the Charlotte Hornets uniforms we were discussing earlier in this episode. He designed that Argyle pattern for the UNC basketball team, and I don't think he did it school-wide. I don't think that was intended to be school-wide. I could be wrong about that. I don't know. I'm a little conflicted. Part of me, I admit, is pushing back against this idea because I can hear in my head people saying, it's branding. You want unified branding. And I just sort of like, everything is just so over-branded, like in a way that for me often feels like square peg and round hole. Like it's just trying too hard and just imposing a same pattern across a lot of different sports with a lot of different heritages and different protocols and their own histories and their own quirks and all that kind of thing. Sure, you want the same color scheme. It's your school colors. But I think you can go too far with this idea of unified branding.
And so this question is for Paul only, and I think most of the uni world is going to be dying to hear this one. It's from David Weishman, who asks, Paul, why do you hate purple so much?
Would you believe I've never been asked that before? It does come up from time to time. And the answer is I'm fine with purple in nature. Like plums or violets or eggplants, I think are wonderful. But purple in design has always struck me as tacky. Purple to me is like the diva of colors, the Celine Dion of colors. It never is content to do a little bit when it can do too much, and it always does too much. It just strikes me as a really loud, tacky color, and it doesn't work for me in uniforms, in most uniforms.
Paul, that unnecessary shot at Canada's treasure, Celine Dion.
I didn't even think about that, but you're right. But, what does she do? She left Canada and she's got like a residency now at Vegas, which is like the ultimate tacky, flashy thing.
You're right. Nuts to her.
And next we're going to do our lightning round, and this is going to be for Chris only. From Scott Allen, if you were offered the choice of A, eliminating ad patches from NBA uniforms, or B, scaling back all the unrecognizable NBA alternate uniforms, which would you choose?
That's unfair. Scaling back unrecognizable NBA uniforms, because the ad patch is small. They suck, right? They suck, but they're small and they're out of the way. But I hate the unrecognizable uniforms. I need to know who's playing. To me, that's the most important thing. I'll overlook a small ad patch. Just don't make them any bigger.
From Jim Linetti, would you like to see all baseball players' glove colors coordinated in team colors, or for them to remain in a variety of colors and or natural leather?
I think I'm fine either way on this. Natural leather is a nice traditional look, kind of like the old goalie pads. But I don't mind if they're matching, as long as they match the color scheme. None of this neon green on a team that wears blue and red. That's where I draw the line. Everything else is fine.
Jean-Sebastian Vaillancourt at JS Vaillancourt asks, Do you prefer when teams keep the same look forever, like the Celtics, or when they change it frequently, like the Cavs?
Of those two options, same look forever, though it's bad for my business, I guess. My ideal franchise keeps the same general look for their entirety of their franchise history and just evolves it and tweaks it slightly over time to make things a little more fresh. None of this full scale, top to bottom, tear it down like the Cavs or the Marlins do every few years.
All right. And from David Weishman, would you be in favor of the PGA Tour allowing players to wear shorts? I know there has been movement among the players to make the adjustment.
Shorts is never a good look, right, on anything. But honestly, I don't care. I don't watch golf enough to care about it. If the players feel better wearing shorts, let them wear shorts.
I'm going to just jump in here, even though I'm not supposed to talk about these.
Mute his mic.
These 4 questions were just for Chris, but I have 2 words for you. John Daly.
All right. So that will conclude our lightning round for Chris with a late addition from Paul. And moving on, Justin Black asks, have either of you ever considered a career having to do with designing or maybe manufacturing team uniforms? Have you ever consulted on a team's uniforms decisions, compensated or not?
I am definitely not a designer. I'm not a bad art director when I work with other designers, but I'm not a designer. I have never designed a uniform. I have no desire to design a uniform. And I certainly don't want to manufacture a uniform. I don't want to go into that business. I've never consulted officially with a team, nor would I want to do that because that would really put me in a sort of compromised position to write about that team and its uniforms. It would basically be a conflict of interest. A few teams have reached out to me and sort of said, we're planning to do this. What do you think, or how do you think our fans are going to react? That I've gotten a few times. They've sort of tried to take the temperature because they know I relate a lot to uniform fans and interact with my audience a lot. And so that I'm willing to do. And it's always interesting when that happens, but I've never served in an official capacity, as a consultant or something like that. It would be something interesting to do maybe when my journalism career is over. That I would consider that.
I took design in college, so I think I can do some design, though I'm nowhere near the level of what these pro designers can do. So
you're a good designer, actually.
Thank you, Paul. A lot of those graphics I throw up on Twitter or on the website are done by me. Like I said, I couldn't do a pro level design. I remember I designed the logo for a bar mitzvah back like in 2003, and I got paid for it. So I think that was my first and only paid design gig.
Did you then? You didn't move on to do the design for the bris?
Nice. No, I didn't move on to do that. The bris comes before the bar mitzvah.
Well, yeah. That's
right. Okay. I love design, but I'm not good enough to do for an actual team. I have acted as a consultant, not with a team, but with a designer who was designing for a team. I've helped. I've been compensated. I have never run into the situation where I've had to report on that design yet, though I have a feeling that day will be coming soon, because some of the ones I've consulted on are due to come out soon. So that'll be an interesting day for me. I might pass it off to somebody else. I do have other writers that write for me. And like Paul, I find it's a lot of fun when I get asked for my opinion. And I love to help out when people seek my opinion. It makes me feel like, my opinion's valued, which is nice, especially in a family situation here where I get tuned out most of the time. but that's fine.
We have one more question, and if I'm speaking frank here, I think it's the best. It comes from our best-looking questioner from me. And so recently, the Bridgeport Sound Tigers changed their nickname to the Bridgeport Islanders to match as their parent team, the New York Islanders. How do you think teams should handle their minor league affiliate? a carbon copy, same name with local flair for their logo and jerseys, a unique name with a similar jersey or colors, or a unique name with their own jersey and colors?
That's a good question from whoever sent that in. Personally, I like a theme across the minor leagues. Not necessarily a carbon copy. A name that can be, tied to the big league team, but is also unique to the market. A good example is, say, the Memphis Redbirds and the St. Louis Cardinals, right? Different, but similar. Think the Calgary Flames, and their AHL team is usually named the Heat. Makes sense, right? The problem is that this only works if a minor league team and their major league team are tied together like long term. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you are switching up the nickname over and over again in that minor league market, and that's not good. You want some consistency with that. But on the other hand, a lot of these new names that are coming out in the minor leagues, they are silly, but they are ultra unique to that market. And they do teach us things about that market that we otherwise never would have known about. Like the Binghamton Rumble Ponies, right? A silly name, but where else would I have learned that Binghamton was the home of like some sort of Ferris or merry-go-round situation, right?
I actually went to college in Binghamton, and
okay, good example.
So they have the largest concentration of classic carousels in North America. Yeah,
exactly. And I never would have known that if it wasn't for that silly minor league team name. So that does serve a purpose in one way. But personally, my number one thing is a theme across all the minor league levels that tie to the major league.
I want to say here, I feel really bad for minor league fans because the team names change all the time, and so do the team affiliations. Yeah. And so, if you see a player go through your town and then you follow him to you keep track of him on the major league team, and then you end up sort of by association rooting for that top level team, even if they're not in your market or even in your state or region or time zone or whatever. And then 2 years later, the team, now we're affiliated with this other team, and now we have a different name, and it seems hard. And I feel really spoiled as someone who lives in New York, where obviously there's none of that changing around. Everything's pretty constant and consistent. And I think it's, for those of us who live in a big market, it can be hard to relate to what goes on in the smaller markets. And I think it's probably a very challenging situation. You have to sort of compartmentalize a lot differently as a fan. And so to say, what should a team's identity be? One thing I don't like is just using the parent team's name. Like before the Binghamton Rumble Ponies came around, they were just the Binghamton Mets. And that just seems like a cop out. Like you come up with your own local identity. And the example that the questioner, who was the questioner again? That he came up with about the Bridgeport Sound Tigers becoming the Bridgeport Islanders. I mean, Bridgeport is not an island. It's not on an island. Like
North America is an island, Paul.
Well, yeah, it just doesn't make sense, man. And like I feel like there's a lot of these that just don't make sense when you use the parent club's name. And so I'm I think it's hard to come up with the right answer about what to do. But when you have like a team like the Toledo Mud Hens, like, isn't it great that for decades and decades and decades and generations and references on episodes of MASH and all this stuff, there's references to the Toledo Mud Hens, and that they've been affiliated with different teams. But they are like the minor league team in Toledo, Ohio is called the Mud Hens, period. And I kind of like that they get to have their own identity irrespective of their major league parent affiliation. I kind of like that approach.
Durham Bulls, another good example of that. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, you have the poor Buffalo Bisons fans who, or their team changes names depending on where they're playing this season. And if I recall correctly, that disembodied voice we heard earlier, he said that was the last question, right? So this marathon is over, I think.
Apparently, we have reached the end.
But I enjoyed this. I loved answering these questions. I hope we do this again.
I hope we do it again, and I'm sure we will do it again. It was really, really fun.
whenever we go back to more regular episodes, perhaps in the fall, perhaps next year, who knows? But we definitely will do this again. As long as you keep sending in those quality questions, we will do this again. Paul, it's been an episode. We've learned a lot about each other. Why don't you read us out?
Unified is a joint production of UniWatch and SportsLogos.Net. Our producer, editor, and also our ace question asker for this episode is the great Chris Fraderigo. Show notes for this episode are available at our website, unified.show. You can follow us on Twitter at UnifiedCast. The Unified logo is by Brian Gundell, and our theme music is by Chuck Rios. Chris would like you to know that there are only about 10 copies left of the dual-signed VIP edition of the book he created with great Todd Radom, Fabric of the Game. You can get copies, those last 10 copies, at fabricofthegamebook.com. That's fabricofthegamebook.com. If you're listening to us on audio, you can also see video versions of our episodes at youtube.com/sportslogos. The animation at the start of our videos is by Michael Princep. To inquire about advertising or anything else, email us at info@unified.show. If you like our show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And that, I believe, is it for this episode. And that's it for this month. We're going to shift to a monthly schedule for the rest of the summer. The next time we'll see you will be sometime in mid-June. We haven't set the exact date yet. We'll have one episode in June, one in July, one in August. And Chris, I will see you then.
Bye, Paul. Have a good one.
You too, and thanks to all our great listeners and viewers. We'll see you next month.